All right. So, I mean, this is just an open mic session. You can come and ask the question you like. Well, I'll just start with one quick question. The question is for Luis and Lukman. So, in the last slide, you in the conclusion slide, I read something which I'm not clear, so I just wanted to understand that you said need to standardize addresses of the ASN. So, what does it mean, if you can clarify? Mike. Okay.
So what we meant by this is that we would like to have better registries of ASs and really have correct information in them because they tend to be incorrect and false, which is one of the bottleneck we're experiencing. So this is what we meant. We basically would like to have better quality of information and not end up with information that we know for a fact are false.
Okay. So, and another quick question.
So, sorry, if I may. There is also the problem of access of measures from RIPE tools, because we don't have a limited access to those to RTTs and trace routes and ping star, and this can be an issue to perform.
Okay, just staying on the same point is so when you were doing all the calculations, there are a lot of ISPs or the ASN holders who span more than one country and multiple countries. So how do you differentiate between them, or you just consider the ASN where it was registered?
So this is a very interesting question, and it's a very important one as well. So what we usually do is that we're going to look at the registry and see where it's located, and this is what we're going to infer about the location. But sometimes we will also do an extra effort in order to have a really good understanding of what is happening, and this is where I think I should help to my colleague.
It will depend also on the size of the autonomous system, because in the case of a very large one, like a level 3, for instance, we will not, of course, try and find where it is located. But for the case of Kurdistan or other conflictual issues, we will get actually the only data we can have, which is the registered address of the autonomous systems company. But in many cases, you can't find a specific address. But even a city can be of interest, even a region, even some indication of a potential location. And we can sometimes confirm it with what we would call open source investigation, because then we can find details of the company in other registries, national registries. So we will try, actually we will perform open source investigation to try and find where the autonomous systems are located the most precise way.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just quickly ask one question to Christine. So you saw this presentation, right? So from the ITU's perspective, now there's usually, from the technical perspective, we don't talk about the political aspects usually. But whether we like it or not, every time there is a political problem, there is an impact on the technical infrastructure. And we are focusing on the technical infrastructure by all means. So is there any way to highlight this issue through the relevant platform, saying it breaks the internet? That it should be conveyed to the relevant authorities, because ITU deals with the right people at the right places, and not the engineers. We don't talk to the governments on that level. But should there be a platform where this message should be conveyed that, well, your decisions impact the infrastructure on the ground?
Okay, if I understand right your question, I think what has been done over the past decade and more is that policymakers have been discussing alone, specifically if we're talking about internet exchange points. Policymakers have been discussing alone, and the technical community, the NOGs, the operators have been developing as the market evolves and as business needs evolve. I think what is needed is not to raise those flags, but of course, it's important to raise flags in government venues, but I think what is needed is to have a joint discussion, a joint dialogue where both parties are on the same table. And this is why, I think this is one of the outputs that came out of the Bahrain workshop that happened, that was hosted by the Bahraini regulator. The technical community was invited to that workshop, which was predominantly a regulators conference, and it was a workshop aside that conference. And out of that, MENOG actually extended the invitation to the League of Arab States and to the ITU to come and be here. I think what needs to be done is build upon that and actually have a platform that is constantly. I don't know. Should I continue?
Continue.
Have a platform that is constantly bringing the two parties on the table. So not just a forum, but always have, and that's an open call to MENOG to actually always continue inviting regulators and policymakers to that peering forum.
Okay, thank you. So let's go to the, yes, please.
Nabil Bukhari, the Vice of Lebanon. My question is to Christine. The internet revolution was an evolution. So the various connectivity that you showed on your slide globally, as compared to the Arab countries' interconnectivity and peering, shows obviously a lack of interconnectivity between the Arab country. But in my perception, there is economical reason for that. And the reason is that there are no connectivity forward between the Arabic countries. If there was any economical reason that Lebanon should connect to Egypt, that would have happened, because financially that would have dictated that to happen. So within your work, was there any assessment of the economical needs for such connectivities?
Yeah, well, the work that has been done is actually to assess the impact of regulations, the negative impact of regulations on that economic need. So what I want to try to highlight is that it's true. There is no incentive, there is no business incentive for operators to reach out cross borders to neighboring Arab countries for two specific reasons. One reason is that the local content industry is extremely low developed, so there is no need to go to, the content is elsewhere and operators follow the content simply. The other reason being is that it is not cost effective, because pricing of local infrastructure, local interconnection at the different landing stations is highly priced. And if you look at even the transit services within the region, you find them quite high. So why would an operator go and invest in that infrastructure if there is no business incentive and it is expensive? It simply goes beyond. So to address that, regulations need to eliminate those barriers. Instead of saying we're going to mandate peering, or we're going to enforce interconnection between IXPs, which is something that has been classically said for some time, IXPs in the Arab region, it's a wrong approach. The better approach is look at the environment, remove the hurdles, remove the regulatory barriers, and introduce competition in terrestrial infrastructure. In that sense, there would be an incentive for hosting companies to bring the content back, and for operators to invest in terrestrial or in whatever, even peering sessions with other Arab countries.
So, next.
Hello, got a question for Lumena. It's from our remote participants in Yemen. You can respond in Arabic if you want to. They really liked your story and they would like to get more details. So I have their email if you want to contact them. So they ask, in your case as an IXP, do you charge your subscriber, and how do you do that in layer 2?
6P is free fees, but because it's government sector.
And just another question from them on you. In Sudan, did you create a private BGP and a private IXP based on industry, like banking industry and educational one? And did you connect them together with your IXP?
The IXB is government only. This is a policy in Sudan. Just.
Right. Thank you.
Thank
John.
Hi, Nishal Goverdan, Packet Clearinghouse. How many questions do I get?
As many as you want, you will hold everyone for lunch, that's fine.
They've shut me off for the microphone. No, they haven't. Okay, excellent. My first, I guess, comment to a reader. Christina, fantastic presentation. I loved it. Thank you for highlighting the issues. Thank you for highlighting the problems. You've actually answered my first question, which was what's MENOG's responsibility here? And as you said, MENOG can continuously engage, etc. But now I want you to be a little more specific, if you don't mind. I'm not from this region, so I don't know the geography very well. So I was busy on my iPad trying to link cities. Damascus is less than 100 kilometers away from here, which is fantastic news to me. But there's no connection between Damascus and Beirut. So on one hand, and there's a thread on Twitter now, but on one hand we've got an economy that's quite small, which is, let's say Beirut right now, from an internet economy perspective, and you've got a potentially larger community economy in Damascus that's begging for access to a faster, cheaper, safer access to the rest of the world. What would be your recipe for getting the smaller economy in Beirut to communicate with that large recipe, the large economy in Damascus, to get them access to shared content, the stuff that everybody's looking for on the internet? Bearing in mind that we need the elements that we heard about yesterday and the things that you brought out in your presentation, competition, cross-border connectivity, etc. What would be your ideal recipe, your advice, I guess, having done the study, for the policymakers sitting here and listening in to say this is how you should go forward?
I think I don't have silver bullets, okay? So there are many problems that have been there for so long. But what I really believe in, having been for a short time working on the specific case of the Arab region, maybe the last 2 years, is that there is a dialogue that's missing between policymakers and operators. Policymakers tend to believe that they can actually enforce such a connectivity between, for example, then that's just a theoretical example, Damascus and Beirut, simply by telling operators make that connection. And that has been the case, and it took some time to understand, that this is actually not possible, okay? But I think they're there. What is important now is to build upon that and come up with ideas. Ideas that came to the table was maybe policies that would incentivize meet and greet. So each operator would go to the borders, and then they would meet there somewhere. So you have from both sides a place to meet and greet. But I don't have answer to your question. What I think needs to be done is further discussion on how to make terrestrial connectivity and peering over that connectivity more competitive and more appealing to the operators. I'm sorry, I don't have a direct answer to your question. That's the simple answer.
Okay. Oh, fellow troublemaker, I cede the microphone.
Martin on the mic, please.
Hi, Martin Levy from Cloudflare. Let's take a positive approach to this. Christina, on your graph, you pointed out a statistic that the Middle East just had a lower statistical number of nearly every category that you showed. And from the, sorry, I've forgotten your names, from the two gentlemen with your study, you in a way were hard pressed to find interconnections there. Let's project to the future. Isn't it inevitable that these problems get solved at some point in time, in that it is in the best interest ultimately of both networks in the region, content, to which I come from a content side of the equation, that internet exchanges do proliferate, that cross-border connections do proliferate at some point, and that content is hosted locally inside the region at some point. So this positive mindset of saying at some point in time this will all be solved, and that all the various people that have that are involved in this. So my question is it possible to work backwards from this inevitable assumptive statement that I'm making? If I'm wrong, please tell me. And work backwards and say, this is the specifics that need to be solved, whether it be cross-border and costing, whether it be localized hosting, whether it be regulatory issues that either hamper or just, if I may say, slow at solving problems. Is there a way of looking at this future point and saying, yes, it's inevitable that this will be solved, and then think backwards from there so that we can move past where we are today? And I should actually say, from a MENOG point of view, having come to MENOG for many, many years, we are way further ahead than we were half a dozen or more years ago. Actually, it's been a significant 5 or 6 years. So is that not hope enough that we'll get to some endpoint? It's a long way of asking how to be very positive and not be a troublemaker at the microphone.
Should I take that? I think yes. The answer to your question is yes. And in this very positive spirit, I would say that I've seen in the recent year a quicker pace than was there in recent years. So there is some openness. If I talk from the government's perspective, there is some openness to look at policies. There is we're not yet there to actually implement the actions that I think can clearly be identified at this stage. I think we're there. We can look backwards and say, here's what we need to do. We would probably be nailing them with an accuracy of 90% maybe. So we're pretty much aware of where the problems are. I don't think decisions were yet completely taken to eliminate those barriers, but there's a wave of openness that is happening, and that's my point of view. So yes, in that spirit, I think this is achievable. I don't know if you...
Well, I'm just answer shortly that geopolitics is almost by essence not very much optimistic, and that as long as there will be conflicts or even just, as I said, power struggles, that will impact necessarily the network, because networks are also ruled by governments and political entities. It will be hard to have this optimistic approach because we will just, in my field at least, we just look at the data and the facts. Well, it's the objective at least. And in the 90s and beginning of the 2000s, there was really a strong hope that the internet would become more and more open and more interconnected. And we have seen backlashes in this area. So I'm not speaking specifically of the region here, but China, Russia, Iran are good examples of what can happen when when political powers want to take a different approach than what was expected at the beginning. So not speaking for this region specifically, because I'm not a specialist of this region, but it's just hard for me to take as a basis an optimistic approach.
Yeah, I just would like to add the fact that one of the plot we showed was this computation of complexity, which was telling you how easy it was for an actor, specifically a government, to control its network. And the smaller this value was, and the easier it was for the government to do so. And what we've noticed in the few years, since I think 2010, is that this value has come down drastically. So overall, we have a tendency to have less diversity, in the sense that most of the new ISs and the new cables that are
going through this region of the world are usually controlled by government. So you have like less diversity in that sense, which is something that is going a little bit against the optimistic view where you want to have very diversified network and where you want to have as much as possible resilient network. So this also adds to the point my colleague made. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Okay, we have 5 minutes, so let's
Yeah.
take
I
some
have,
questions.
I have great hope in coming back to the microphone in 5 years and this never being an issue at that point. I hope that's
Hopefully,
the case.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so.
Okay. Mic is closed.
My point was exactly what he said. I mean, that slide that shows less complexity means more control. And more control would mean less diversity and less connectivity. So I'm not as hopeful as Martin is or as Christine is, because in this region it seems that the complexity moved to be next to non-existing, which means diversity is next to non-existent. And given the political disarray that the countries are in, we're going to see less connectivity until they become more friendly and more brotherly.
Well, originally from Pakistan, I can tell you one thing. You dropped the mic. I didn't complete this. It's not a drop mic situation anyway. Mic drops. You have to drop it again then. So as I said, originally from Pakistan, I can give you one thing is geopolitics says don't use the terrestrial cable between India and Pakistan. Technology says let's talk in Marseille, right? So it's just a matter of telling the geopolitics, who's running the geopolitics, that well, it's inevitable. It's gonna happen whether you force it right now or for a couple of years, but it's gonna happen. So I'm as hopeful as Martin is. 5 years, somebody else will be on the stage for sure, not me. But we will come back and say there's some very positive things on the mic. So Nishal, last question.
Nishal again. I'm an economist, and I would always point to the fact that you should tell the politicians that what they're doing is exporting capital. If there's one thing politicians understand, it's money. We all know that, right? And point to how they're wasting their own money. My last question is actually an easier one. It's for Momina. Momina, thank you. That was very interesting. It's a simple question. You said the 6 was created in 2011 as a layer 3 construct. And you made the change this year, 2019. What took so long? That's all.
What took so long to make it a real IXP? So I mean, so one comment I would say,
Yes,
never,
I understand. You say
it's never too late to make the right move. So it's not a criticism. It's just
it's very difficult change in Sudan. It's very difficult because I am work. Why change?
Yes,
I am
you
working.
started
Yes.
with this question.
Yes, I'm working. Why change? It's Sudanese. Not easy to
accept the change. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So on the same note, if I may ask, probably I misread it, but in your presentation you says there is no bilateral peering. So is it by force that you don't allow any bilateral peering and everybody has to peer with the route server? Is it mandatory multilateral peering? Or
connected to the route service is a policy. Our mention in the first slide, the 6P is government because it is policy.
Okay, so there is no bilateral peering.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So, any other question? If no other question, I would say thank you so much to our esteemed panelists. Very interesting discussion, and we hope to see some really positive and good data next time. And we would like to see you next time as well. And hopefully by that time you have more data points to gather more information, and specifically the region, sub-region, and get into more geopolitical stuff so that we can provide more information to politicians saying, well, this doesn't work, let's fix it. Thank you, everyone. I think lunch is ready.